Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Freddie Collier, the director of the Cleveland City Planning Commission. Before I begin my remarks, I just have to make a comment. We talk often about infrastructure, bike trails, and things of that nature, and we often have this dialogue amongst ourselves, and I believe that everyone in this room is a part of that choir who really is looking for culture change. But one of the things that we have to realize is that ultimately, this is about human impact. It's about health. It's about equity. It's about sustainability. I think there's a much higher calling that we have to pay attention to. And it's not just about what we deal with on a day-to-day basis, but it's really about how we convey the message. And I learned yesterday, after spending some time with our guest here, how important having a candid, open, and clear dialogue, what that's all about. So I'm really delighted to do this introduction, and I really think that your comments yesterday gave the city of Cleveland a booster shot in the arm, and I think it opened up a different perspective, and I would hope that as we move forward, we approach things in a much more open and thoughtful manner, although we're making great strides. So, having said that, it is my pleasure to introduce to you today's speaker, Janette Sadik-Khan, Principal of Transportation at Bloomberg Associates and author of Street Fight, a handbook for an urban revolution. Today's forum is the keynote address for the American Planning Association Ohio Chapter's We Plan CLE, an annual event open to all designed to foster discussion and innovation centered on a central theme. The 2016 theme is repurpose. We make critical decisions about our community every day. One of the questions that we face is how do we grow, but do it in a more sustainable way? How can we use the resources which are available to us and shed a new light on them or approach them from a different lens? Through collaboration and the consideration of different perspectives, we can begin to spark new ideas that illuminate a much clearer future. Today's speaker is one of the leading voices on urban transportation policy and is internationally respected for her transformative redesigns of New York City streets and rapid implementation strategies that are being replicated today in cities around the world. Ms. Sadik-Khan was commissioner of the New York City Department of Transportation from 2007 to 2013 under Mayor Michael Bloomberg. During her tenure, New York City added nearly 400 miles of bike lanes and the first parking-protected bike paths in North America. That's impressive. Ms. Sadik-Khan also oversaw the launch of City Bike, the nation's largest bike share system, which has been used more than 22 million times since its inception. The department she led set in motion more than 60 plazas across the city, sparking economic recovery. Ms. Sadik-Khan worked with the Metropolitan Transportation Authority to launch the city's first 6 rapid bus lines and oversaw hundreds of intersection and street redesigns that contributed to record low traffic fatalities. Her transformative work in New York City is outlined in her book, Street Fight. In her current role as principal at Bloomberg Associates, Mrs. Sadik-Khan assists mayors in developing street redesigns in cities from Los Angeles to Mexico City to Rio and Athens, truly international. As chair of the National Association of Transportation Officials, otherwise known as NACTO, she led the development and publication of NACTO's Global and Urban Street Design Guides and the Urban Bikeway Design Guide. The new standards in these documents have been recognized by the U.S. Department of Transportation and adopted by 40 cities worldwide. Ms. Sadik-Khan holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science from Occidental College and a JD from Columbia University School of Law. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming Janette Sadik-Khan.
Well, it is great to be here to participate in this conversation of consequence, and I hope it is a conversation of consequence, and to be a part of this illustrious history that Dan outlined at the Cleveland Club. When you take a look at the roster of speakers, it is indeed not only a rogues gallery, but a really impressive group of folk that have been here. And I think Freddie put it best. One of the central issues of our time is how are we going to repurpose our assets and our infrastructure to update them to meet 21st century needs? And how are we going to grow? And that is this issue that cities around the world are wrestling with right now. And it is wonderful to be here. I was actually here in Cleveland 5 years ago, and it is astonishing to see the changes that have happened in this city in this short period of time. I had a great tour yesterday with Matt and with Arthur and with Chris and with Debbie and Joe and Marty, and it was a whirlwind tour, but it really did underscore just how much change is underway. And I'm going to talk about the changes in New York City, but one of the things that I was really left with after yesterday was you have such a great story to tell, right? And it seems like nobody's got that story. I really feel like this city is on the cusp of all this change, and part of getting that new narrative is really a challenge for you going forward. It's not the burning of the Cuyahoga River anymore. And so I think that that's, some of the lessons that we learned from New York is actually getting ahead of the curve and telling that story along with making the transformations that you see in concrete, asphalt, and steel. So it is great to be here to talk about street fight and street fights. How many of you have been to New York in the last 5 years? Oh my God. How about the last 3 years? Jeez. Last year? Oh my God, our tourism program is working great. That's impressive. Okay, well, so a lot of you have seen some of the transformations that we've made in New York City. And before I start, I want to recognize the 4,500 men and women at the New York City Department of Transportation who made the changes that I talked about on the ground happen. They took care of our infrastructure on a day-to-day basis, but they're the ones that actually made these changes happen. And they are the true heroes of this story. And one in particular, Seth Solomano, who's here, my colleague and co-author, and he was the press secretary at the New York City Department of Transportation, and yes, Freudian. And he was very much a part of telling that story and really conveying to the public what this all meant. So I'm going to start with a question. What do you all think about when you think about a street? What comes to mind when you think about a street? Cars. Walking. Nice. Rarely hear that. Crossing safely. People. Potholes. Potholes a big one. It's true. Well, most people, when they think about streets, think about a scene like this. And streets are what make cities great and also what makes cities not so great. And for decades, our streets have really been governed by this kind of dashboard view of the road. Leaders looked at streets like this and said, yep, everything is working just fine. But it wasn't always this way. Our streets used to function more like living rooms. And there were lots of choices for getting around, for walking, for biking, for taking carriages. This is Euclid Avenue 100 years ago. And this is the same intersection today. And you can see the choices have been whittled away, and our streets began to morph into highways. And streets can be lively places for people, but for most of the last century, they've been places for cars with devastating consequences. 33,000 people dying each year on our streets, congested streets, lifeless streets. And this didn't happen by chance. This happened by design. And this design had an impact on our choices for getting around. And you look at this street here, there are no people on this street. Do you think that's because people just don't want to walk? No, the street actually does not give them a choice, not even any sidewalks. And it reminds me of this video game that I used to play. How many of you played Frogger? Right? Okay, I don't know why it's called Frogger. This should have been called Pedestrian. Right? And here is a real-life translation. There are all sorts of signs for how a street wants to be used. And you can see it when people are trying to cross mid-block. And it's a sign of how our streets have actually let people fall through the cracks. And you look at streets like these, and you get the sense that people got so tired of constantly battling cars that they actually gave up the fight, that they forgot that our streets could be any different. Not that it was really a fair fight. The national standards for our streets come from the federal government, and they dictate what can or cannot happen on our streets. And these standards are 50 years old. And it dictates the size of the font on our signs, the width of the lanes on our streets. It's like the 10 Commandments, but 500 pages long, with the best clip art that money can buy. And they just forgot one thing. People, you can read through all of these books and find not a single person in all of those pages. An emoji interpretation of this looks like this. You start with a city, you add more roads, you throw in some stoplights, you get those pesky pedestrians out of the way, and voila, you've got a lot of engineers celebrating yet another job well done, and with a lot of fast cars, but just don't try to cross that street on foot. But it doesn't have to be this way. We can reclaim, we can reimagine, we can redesign our streets. It just takes those who care and those who dare. And the stakes are high because the growth of the planet is in cities. And our work in New York City stemmed from Mayor Mike Bloomberg's Plan YC long-range sustainability plan. And it looked at how are we going to accommodate the 1 million more people that were expected to move to New York City by 2030 and still improve the quality of life in our business districts and our neighborhoods. And that had profound implications for how we used and designed our streets. And we translated that vision from Plan YC into a strategic plan for the agency to bring us closer to the city that we wanted to see. And by the end of the Bloomberg administration, New York City was a very different place, as many of you have seen. We created 400 miles of on-street bike lanes, 60 plazas, 7 rapid bus lanes, largest bike share in North America, safest streets in 100 years. That's the short version of the story. The slightly longer version of the story is that every day was a fight to give more choices for people. And we were fighting to change the culture of New York and to set it in a new direction. And I learned a lot of lessons along the way. Yeah, these are some of my favorites. And one of the lessons that we learned, and this I think is a really profound lesson for Cleveland, is that you can paint the city you want to see. And like any city, we had to start with the budget that we had and the streets that we have. But you can accomplish a lot with just the supplies that you have on hand. And we wanted to show New Yorkers what was possible. This is Times Square in the 1950s, and this is Times Square 60 years later in 2008. And not much has changed. And if you were in business and you didn't change your major capital asset for 60 years, do you think you'd still be in business? Probably not. But there is a lot you can do with paint and a little imagination. So a few months after my appointment, we created the first pedestrian plaza. This was on Pearl Street in Brooklyn, and we just used paint, tables and chairs, planters. It didn't take years of planning studies. It didn't take millions of dollars, but we showed people what the possibilities were. And we turned it from a place that people parked to a place that people wanted to be. And again, New Yorkers were actually tired of waiting years and years for change, right? They didn't believe it. When we launched the Plan YC program, a greater, greener New York, New Yorkers, skeptical lot. They thought, oh yeah, right, greater, greener New York. We're never going to see that. We're still building for the Second Avenue subway after 60 years. So nobody believed that we were going to see any kind of change. And so moving quickly to show what was possible so that people could see and touch and feel this change was a critical part of getting this new mindset that we can do things differently. And we did these transformations all over town. This is what we did on Pearl Street. Again, just a parking lot, painted it, boom, new plaza. Did this on 14th Street. Many of you have been to 14th Street and seen the meatpacking district. Again, moved very quickly to change it in close to real time. And in Madison Square, this is one of the largest intersections in New York City, a warren of streets coming together, basically created 65,000 square feet of new public space. I love this picture because as soon as we coned it off, an art class just materialized in the street, right? Boom, they were there, like 2 hours after we put the orange cones out. It just shows you how hungry people are for public space in New York City. And today, it is one of the most successful projects in the city. And people choose to sit in the plaza rather than in the park, just to feel the pulse of the city. And again, not a lot of money, not a lot of time. So after we did all of these projects, this showcase of projects all over the city, we took our toolkit to the crossroads of the world, Times Square. Most of Manhattan, as you know, is on a grid, but Broadway cuts diagonally through it, and it creates squares like these, but also hot spots of congestion. I think there was congestion in Times Square dating back to the buggy days, horse cart days. I'm sure there was congestion. And you can see the problem that had been hidden in plain sight. 90% of the real estate there was dedicated to cars, but 90% of the space was used by pedestrians. So the street was out of balance. And people traded the safety of the sidewalk for the street. People would you would come to town and you'd walk four abreast with your friends and family, and New Yorkers behind you would go crazy because we don't like to stop. And so we want to get around in a New York minute, so we'll jump around, all of you looking up at the sights. And then we get hit. And so it was a very dangerous spot. And people had tried to fix it for years, signal changes, lane changes, nothing really worked. 350,000 people walking through this space every day. So we brought this idea to Mike Bloomberg, try it as a pilot, see if it worked. You can imagine his initial skepticism there, especially since it was in the middle of an election year. But we said we were going to do it as a pilot, and that went a long way to reducing the anxiety of neighbors and businesses that were there because people could sort of see immediately the effect. And it really helped get support from the businesses. And it worked, and people came out immediately. They knew what to do with the space, and it became this new symbol of New York, and the newspaper is actually a very interesting story. You can read about it in the book. People didn't talk about the fact that we closed Times Square to cars. They talked about the fact that we put beach chairs in Times Square, right? So all I've got to say is when you have a big project that's controversial, just put out beach chairs because that's going to be what the press covers. And for New Yorkers that would not have been caught dead in Times Square before, we created a great new living room. And this reconstruction work continues today with permanent seating and great digital infrastructure. It's clearly worthy of its name now. You can see the project as it goes through completion. It's remade this image of New York. And it started just with some traffic cones and some beach chairs. I have one of those beach chairs in my office today. But it's a little piece of New York, but it's a model that almost anybody can follow. And by any measure, it was a big success. And measure it we did, because I worked for a very data-driven mayor. And as he liked to say, in God we trust, everyone else bring data. And so we did. And we called our plan Green Light for Midtown, because we wanted to make it clear that we were going to keep traffic moving. And we developed new ways also to measure the impact beyond just what happened to traffic. And we used safety mobility benefits. We found 80% of fewer people walking in the street. We found pedestrian injuries down, motorist injuries down, even as driving times improved. And it was an economic blockbuster. 6 major stores opened. It became one of the top 10 retail locations on the planet. Not a surprise because cars don't shop, people do. And the more people you have in front of these stores, rather than big 2-ton trucks and cars, you're going to have a much better bottom line for these businesses. And we use this new economic analysis on all of our projects, not to just track what happened curb to curb, but what also happened at the cash register. And we found amazing results. On streets where we put down protected bike lanes, we saw almost 50% increase in retail sales along those avenues. We found the same thing with our plaza projects, with our bus projects. And these figures turned some of these small businesses who had been some of our biggest opponents into some of our strongest supporters. But economics aside, nothing is more important than safety. And crash and injury data were at the heart of everything that we did. And we committed to cutting traffic fatalities by 50%. And we started by collecting data on the 7,000 crashes over 4 years that had happened in New York City. And it became the Rosetta Stone for our investment strategy. It directed the who. We found out who, what, when, where, and why these traffic crashes happen. And I encourage you to bring that same kind of analysis to the streets of Cleveland. This kind of data-driven analysis is being adopted by mayors all over the country. Chicago, San Francisco, LA, and Seattle are committing to Vision Zero, the elimination of traffic fatalities, because these leaders know that with analysis and leadership, crashes can be prevented and predicted. And it also demonstrates that great ideas cross borders. And no one has a patent in pavement. And you can see something that works in another city and try it out on your own streets. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. So shortly after starting at DOT, I went to Bogota to check out some of the innovations there, their new BRT program. And it was a great lesson for New York City streets. We have the largest bus fleet in North America and the slowest bus speeds. As my traffic engineer used to say, the only way to get across town in New York City is to be born there. That is not a great model. And so we imported this BRT concept, which you have right here on the Health line, and it's extraordinary. It's been a model for other cities around the country. I'm so amazed at what you've done, generated almost $6 billion worth of return on that investment. And we did the same thing here. We imported this BRT concept, adapted it to New York City streets, called it Select Bus Service, Off-Board Fare Collection, Dedicated Lanes, Camera Enforcement, created 7 lines across 5 boroughs in 6 years. Great results. We also made a trip to Copenhagen to see the innovations that put them on the map. And just like almost everybody else in American traffic management, we'd never seen a protected bike lane. And, it seems so simple. And so we brought this idea back. This is 9th Avenue before, and this is it afterwards. So basically what we did is basically took the parked cars, moved them away from the curb, used them to then pull them a lane out, and they became the protection for cyclists. Very simple, very fast, very easy to do. Parking and people traded places. And it was the start of a new era for cyclists in New York City. And we expanded this to corridors all across the city. We also dramatically expanded our bike network, built an interconnected grid of bike lanes. This is the network in 2007. This is the network in 2013. I love this map because it looks so easy. Yeah, you just put down, no problem. Everybody just put it on the map. Everybody loves it. But it's interesting, we are seeing protected bike lanes surge across the country since we built the first one now almost 10 years ago. And I think that's thanks to new guidance. I talked about that old guidance, AASHTO, MUTCD guidance that we've updated with these new urban street design guides that actually give a permission slip to cities like Cleveland to do things a little differently. And a seismic shift is underway when cities like Los Angeles are building protected bike lanes. And Seattle and Indianapolis and Atlanta and Chicago. But it's not just about moving bikes, it's also about moving people. And by following their footsteps, you can see what's possible and what's been hidden in plain sight. Let me show you what I mean. This is 51st Street between 6th and 7th Avenue. Some of you have seen this. Mid-block crossing. It used to be almost 2 football fields to get to the intersection, from this mid-block crossing. So we channeled a little Harry Potter. We created 6th and a half Avenue. And again, we just looked at where people were walking, where they wanted to go. And this theory applies almost everywhere you look, from this, from the grass that you see in this Bronx neighborhood, which is sending a message about what the neighborhood needed, right? And following the footsteps of people doesn't stop with street design. And we turned the community engagement process on its head. And we asked neighbors where they wanted these plazas to be. And neighborhoods and business districts came together And they got the political sign-off for these different kind of projects, and they took the ownership and they maintained them. And by following the people and giving them the power, you can transform a city. And communities now can apply for everything from sidewalk seating to bike corrals to bike racks to limited edition David Byrne bike racks, which we think are fantastic. And we worked with local artists. I can't say enough about the importance of working with local artists to bring new life to old surfaces. We looked at the streets of New York, the bridges of New York, as a canvas for the city. Whether it was, bridges, even the lowly Jersey barriers, right? And in a city where this used to pass for public seating, which is really not great for seniors, parents with kids, we created a new bench program, and we asked communities where they wanted it to be, and we added 1,000 new benches to the streets of New York. And we also started with a new system of wayfinding. You guys have a great new system of wayfinding. It's extremely impressive to make it easier for people to get around the city. We did it because we actually did a survey, and we found out that at any given point in time, 10% of New Yorkers were lost. Right? And those were just the ones that would admit it. So again, we made them part of the process, asked them where we needed it to go. And it brings me to one of my last points, which is the public domain is in the public's domain, and it is the public's domain. And they will do anything they can to defend it, to put it back to the way that it was, to improve it. So a city that's looking to do big things naturally will have a push-pull relationship with communities. I'm sure you've seen a little bit of that. But building those relationships is just as important as anything that you put down in concrete, asphalt, and steel. And we brought a public involvement process to all of our projects. And the advocates played a crucial role, whether it was at the community board level, transportation alternatives with some of our city council leaders, street films. You've got that here with Bike Cleveland that's doing an amazing job, I think, of making the case. Organizations like Families for Safe Streets, who channeled their own experiences of loss into meaningful action, and they pushed through actually a lowering of the citywide speed limit. It wasn't always easy, in case I made it seem like it was easy. There were bumps in the road. This is actually a project. How many have heard of Prospect Park West? Great. So as you know, it's one of the most famous bike lanes in the world. This had been a dangerous speedway, cyclists on the sidewalk, community asked us to fix it. We put in a protected two-way bike lane. All good, right? Looks so good. Not quite. So as I learned early on, when you push the status quo pushes back hard. And these are people who came out protesting that said that somehow our making the street slower made the street more dangerous. I love this other sign, though. There are things that you like along the way, like don't be conned by Sadik-Khan. That's a good one. That's really creative. I like that. And a local paper called it one of the most contested slab of concrete outside the Gaza Strip. And you can see what they would find so threatening. I mean, who would want to live next to a scene like this, right? So we were sued for 6 years, 6 years of testimony, of agita, but it just ended. They just ended the lawsuit. And it's great, and it is proof that, yes, you can sue, you can say the sky is falling, but you can't keep a good bike lane down. But backlash is not just a New York phenomenon, and you've all been there, you've seen the symptoms, like when you start to see headlines like these. And a surreal part of the backlash is actually defending actions that make streets safer rather than leaving them in their status quo dangerous state. But you need to stand your ground and not make policy based on the press. And so when we launched City Bike, we did a massive outreach, 65,000 online suggestions, over 400 in-person meetings. The system had 6,000 bikes, 330 stations. Now it's grown to 10,000. We knew it would be popular, but we also knew that we would be criticized along the way. And a local magazine captured just exactly why City Bike elicited such strong reactions. Turns out New Yorkers didn't like anything healthy, environmental, that involved sharing, or was, my favorite, vaguely French. It's true. And a tipping point in the backlash came from this Wall Street Journal editorial board member who did this video rant against bikes, and she called us bike crazed, and she said that she represented the majority of New Yorkers who were opposed to the bikes, that the bikes begrimed New York City. She also called out the advocates, saying that they were part of this all-powerful bike lobby that was working hand in hand with this totalitarian mayor. So we actually printed out little buttons that said all-powerful bike lobby that we all wore around. It was great. And my favorite is Jon Stewart, who told it like it was. They're just having bikes, lady. So, I think backlash is a sign that you are doing something right. It is a sign of what happens when you challenge the status quo and you move to a new road order. And today, the typical rider looks much more like the guy on the right than the Mad Max messenger on the left. That's basically got the bike chain with a T-shirt that says "one less car." And it's a major step. Bikes becoming just a part of the way that people commute, do errands, get to school, get married. And it's popular. People are way ahead of the press and politicians when it comes to their streets. And at the last poll taken at the end of the Bloomberg administration, we found 73% support for bike share, 72% support for plazas, 64% support for bike lanes. And if this had been election, and this is an election year, this would have been a landslide. And we saw just how much had changed about about a year ago, when the de Blasio administration said that they were going to rip out the plazas because they were having trouble dealing with the people that were soliciting tips from tourists, the Hello Kitties and the Desnudas. And you probably saw them when all of you apparently have been to New York. So you may have been there, been soliciting, so you saw the problem. But the answer is not to tear out the plazas. And that's exactly what New Yorkers thought, don't tear out these plazas. And, once floated, New Yorkers rushed to defend the plazas. And it was really interesting because 6 years ago, people had been so opposed to taking the cars out of Times Square. And 6 years later, they were appalled to think about putting the cars back in. It was truly a new status quo. And you are seeing a new status quo on your streets. Detroit Avenue, in the Gordon Square Arts District. I didn't get to that yesterday. But East 12th, near Perk Plaza, with the creation of the Towpath Trail, which I think is really transformative. It's incredible to see what's possible there. And Public Square, which is a great new living room for the city. I think having come this far, you should build on its success and keep it open for people. It's a big success that you have there, and it's rare. So, I think it's a really important new space for the city. Plans for a new world-class bike network, really exciting. And the new possibilities for the midways. And, Cleveland is at a tipping point, and it really is exciting to see how much has changed in just 5 years. And I think Cleveland has a lot to tell the world. It is a really great story. And turning your assets into engines for growth, from your new ed and med and cultural districts to better housing and transportation choices, keeping the talent in town, and letting Cleveland be Cleveland and building on your bones, putting your pieces together in new ways. None of this work is easy, and we know it's a fight to change the status quo and to give more space for people. But it is a fight that we can win, and with the vision and the energy and the leadership in this room, it is a fight that we will win, because when you change the street, you change the world. Thank you.
So great.
Thank you. Thanks.
That was so great. I almost forgot that I was supposed to come up and read this. I'm Dan Malthrop. Hello, everybody. We're enjoying a forum here today with Janette Sadik-Khan, Principal of Transportation at Bloomberg Associates and author, as you all know, of Street Fight, A Handbook for an Urban Revolution. We're about to begin the audience Q&A, and we welcome questions from all of you, City Club members, guests, students, and those of you joining us via our webcast. If you'd like to tweet a question, you can tweet it at the City Club, and our staff will work it in. We want to remind you your questions should be brief and to the point. Holding our microphones today are our Marketing and Outreach Coordinator, Faye Walker, and Director of Programming, Stephanie Jansky. Our first question, please.
Take it from Twitter, actually. So Dave, who identifies as a first-time caller but big curb enthusiast, wants to know, should Cleveland continue to buffer our historic curbs?
Buffer the curbs with bike lanes?
I'm not really sure.
I think that we're not protecting the curb, we're protecting the people, right? And so it's not about defending concrete, it's actually making our streets safe for everyone. And I think once you take that kind of strategy and looking at building strong networks, whether they're strong bus networks, whether they're strong bike networks, whether they're strong pedestrian networks, that's basically the geometry that you need to apply to the streets of Cleveland. Yeah.
Hello, my name is David Jurka, and my question is, Jennifer Keesmont, Chief Planner for the City of Toronto, has said that autonomous cars will have as much of an impact on the city as cars did initially. So my question for you is, what are your thoughts on the opportunities for planning now for that expected change? What can be done at this point in order to prepare cities for the best outcome?
I agree with that, and I do think the future of autonomous vehicles it will be a revolution for cities and for our streets and how we actually organize our transportation networks. But one of the things that I think is interesting is that we've focused so much on the technology, and we haven't really focused enough on the land side implications and looking at it from what are the cities that, what do we want our cities to be? It's not just about the shiny new car that's out there, it's about how do we plan for the future that really works with a sort of human-centric view. And I think that we're on the cusp of actually having some of those conversations and design guidelines so that we can work together to make sure that we have streets that work well and provide a connected network and new mobility for people that don't actually otherwise have it. You know, our transit systems have, I think, failed in some regards in terms of first mile, last mile connection. How do we actually make the whole network stronger, but not just turn the streets over to fleets and fleets of autonomous vehicles, right, that just increase the number of vehicles on our street and not just get us where we need to go, which is to improve the mobility and sustainability of our cities. And it's a really profound change. When you think about it, I think we haven't really seen that kind of change in 50 or 60 years. And so it's an exciting moment in time, and I think that we can really harness this new technology to make our streets really much more vibrant and sustainable and repurpose some of this extra asphalt for sustainable modes of transportation and making it easier for it to get around.
Hello. Thank you for coming to Cleveland. My name is Lee Batdorf from Cleveland Heights, member of Clevelanders for Transportation Equity. You gave high praise to the health line. There's a couple issues with the health line, unfortunately. And one of the innovative features of the health line was to be traffic signal overrides, where the bus could get out of through the intersection and beat out the cars a little bit. And the city, it's hard to tell exactly who didn't want this to work, but some money was put into this, federal money. Another problem is that our new fabulous public square has busways in it. Some people have taken quite an offense to having busways in public square, which is in the middle of the city, great place for a bus stop. And city of Cleveland has still, nothing has happened. They still have them closed off. The federal government is not happy with this because the federal government put money into it. Do you have any ideas how we can resolve this? And do you think that do you think that actually treating transit like it was a real valid thing by the city of Cleveland would be worthwhile?
Just a small, non-controversial question there. Thank you for that. No, but I mean, it is these are really important issues, and we put in transit signal prioritization on our select bus service lines, and that's why we saw 20% decrease in travel time and 10% increase in ridership. We know that the technology works. So I can't speak to what is going on in terms of the transportation agencies who are handling this on the streets of Cleveland. I do think that it's a critical part of making bus rapid transit work. To create as dedicated a corridor as possible and to actually make them function, bus rapid transit lines function as surface subways. That's basically key. So I applaud you for calling that question. As to public square, I think that it's, there's lots of opportunities there to make it work for everyone. I really do. And I think that you've created this incredible living room in the heart of downtown Cleveland. And that's hard to do. And it's my understanding that they're collecting data right now to see how it works, what's the impact. And you have over 100,000 people going through that space every day. And so making it easier, encouraging that kind of walking and lingering is basically what makes cities great. So you have this great new front yard, this great new front door to the city. And you've got the streets around it that I think, can work for transit. But again, I worked for a data-driven guy, and I'm a data-driven person, and so hopefully you'll take a look at what the results are and move on from there. Sometimes it's a balancing act. A little bit of travel delay on the bus side for a big return on investment on the pedestrian side. It's a balancing act in cities where there's a lot of competition for the real estate. But I have to say, it is a beautiful new square, and I loved walking through it, and I thought it was great to not have to fight the buses as we were walking through it. Psychologically, it creates a very different space.
Having the buses go around the square is costing RTA millions of dollars. RTAs.
We could definitely have a conversation about that later. I would love to continue that conversation.
Hi, I'm Zoe Adams. I just have a question. I'm curious, in New York, who is responsible for maintaining and programming some of the spaces like the one in Times Square? I'm nervous.
Yeah.
Just curious who is responsible and, who might be paying for it or maintaining it.
No, it's a really important question. The Business Improvement District, and we have several of them, many of them in New York City, takes care of the maintenance of those public spaces. Mike Bloomberg had a very clear directive to us at the Department of Transportation, which was that we were not going to create any public spaces unless there were maintenance agreements. There was local commitment to maintain them. That said, our strategy for public space couldn't be, well, we're only going to do that in areas where there's the business wherewithal to do that, right? We're only going to do that in wealthy areas. That can't be our strategy. So we created a neighborhood plaza partnership program, and we actually funded the maintenance of these different plazas in more distressed neighborhoods until they could get up, the human infrastructure and the capacity to take care of these spaces on their own. And incredibly important. And we did those plazas all over the city. And it was a really important down payment on a new economic development strategy for those neighborhoods. And we saw what happened with that investment in terms of incredible increase in retail sales and commercial activities around those areas. So again, I feel very strongly that you need to have maintenance agreements in place, but it can't be just in wealthy neighborhoods. You need to have a public realm and public space strategy that works citywide.
Hi, so I think that we're probably a room filled with zealous pedestrian advocates. And I don't know why anyone else would think this was anything but super cool, and we're not at all dorky. But that said, I could be wrong, but I don't think there's a single elected official in this room right now. How do we... How do we explain to or help our leadership to understand what a critical issue this is, and especially that outreach that seems like a lot of this grassroots effort needs to happen first? Can you walk us through some of those really pragmatic steps that we could be taking?
Yeah. I think one of the very important first steps to do is to create a vision for where you want to go. I think it's really important for the public to understand that this is part of an overall strategy, and these aren't just one-off little projects, right? A little plaza over here, a little bike lane over there, that this is part of a big vision. I think the other thing to do is to move quickly, to show what's possible, and to work, and to be very targeted and work in neighborhoods where you know there's a lot of appetite for it, right? Where you know they're actually inviting you in. We didn't start in neighborhoods in Staten Island with our plaza program, right? We started in neighborhoods where we knew that people were hungry for this kind of change. So moving quickly to show what's possible is key. The other piece is the data, and I can't say this enough, because to have a series of projects that you can show to elected officials. Look, this is what works, right? This is what's happened to business revenues. This is what's happened on the safety side. This is what's happening to the perception of the space is really, really important. And I can't say enough about the great work that the advocates did in New York City. We actually ended up changing the conversation that we had with communities. We had started the conversation, many years ago. The strategy was you would go to a local community and you would present them with a project, and you'd stand up here like a table, and then you would take questions, and it would usually be like 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night in an inaccessible location. And so it was very difficult for the public to kind of engage. And we changed our entire community engagement process. And we started with the question, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Right? And we worked with them to develop strategies that would help resolve those issues in those community boards. And that went a long way to develop new credibility between the agency and the public. And the conversation at the end of the day changed. And the advocates being there and helping us defend these projects and explaining them to the public was really key. And the piece that was really interesting is that the politicians came in at the end. Mike Bloomberg asked me, recently about, had any of the projects been rolled back that we done? Had the new administration rolled back any of the projects? No. None of the projects have been rolled back. City Bike is expanding, the bike lanes are expanding, the bus lanes are expanding, the plazas are expanding. Why? Part of it is that there's huge public support for these strategies. And again, people are way ahead of the politicians and press when it comes to looking at what their streets can be and what they want to see done. And the other piece is we turned so many of our projects into programs into community-based programs. So communities were applying. And so the demand for all these programs was off the chart. So it's very difficult for elected officials to say no to programs that are wildly popular, that people are just knocking down the door to bring to their neighborhoods, to their streets, right? And again, by creating that showcase, people, even if you don't go through the engineering and the planning and all of that work, you see something that happened down the street and you say, I want that. You see what is possible. And so all of that wrapped together, the vision, the moving quickly to show what's possible, the data collection, and then you see what happens at the end of the day. And that is basically a big part of what the transformation was in New York.
Hi there, my name is Erica. I work in the energy sector and I work a lot with data, and I appreciate your perspective on gathering information to then leverage action. And the fact that you have advocated for a people-centered metric basis, I think we'd be all interested in hearing a little bit about what kinds of questions you maybe found were new that you had to ask or were surprising that helped drive some of those metrics and create those measures to really convince people.
Yeah. Well, there's been actually a lot of work around the world in terms of looking at just getting beyond just measuring how fast and how many cars are in a particular corridor. And so Mike Bloomberg was all about, bringing best practices to the streets of New York, right? And so in the past there had been, if it wasn't made in New York, then we weren't going to look at it, right? You know how New Yorkers can be. And so we actually took the best ideas from around the world, and there were a lot of places where we were looking at what are the economics, really what is happening beyond just the street itself on the traffic. So looking at the economic mobility benefits, looking at the safety benefits, which are really, really key. So we transformed our data collection efforts. The agency itself had collected a lot of data, but wasn't quite clear what it was for. And so we really updated our data sets and data collection program, and then we actually put the data out in a publicly attractive way, right? Instead of like a 50-page report on what was the impact of, the 9th Avenue bike lane on local retail, and, turn to page 459, we did a very graphically appealing set of reports so that people could instantly sort of catch what was happening there. And so it was really a concerted effort to transform the data collection piece, what we collected it and what we used it for, and then presenting it in a way that would resonate with the public. So I can get into you perhaps later about how the difficulty of getting the Department of Finance to get the tax information that we needed and disaggregating out the data sets and all that kind of pieces. But the data itself, the methodology that we used is actually on the New York City DOT website, and it's available to everybody. So I encourage, if you're interested in how we did that and make it easy for other cities to use, that's actually on the New York City DOT site.
Hi, thanks. First, I hope you get a chance to come back again soon, because I think the near future and the next couple of years are going to be more promising than the most recent past years. So I hope you can get a chance to see that progress as well. My question builds on the data questions and what it means for your actual residents. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to share about things like more riders and better health for New York City residents, or better fiscal health for New York City neighborhoods?
Yeah, we actually have data on all of those issues. We issued a report called Measuring the Street, which actually documents, and again, all of these reports are available on the New York City DOT website, but whether it was the first project I showed you on Pearl Street, that underutilized parking lot that we just painted the curbs for, we saw 173% increase in retail sales in that neighborhood, which was twice what adjacent areas, saw. So we were very direct in taking a look at what those impacts would be. Another big piece, and I can't say enough about this, was looking at the safety impacts, looking at what these projects did to reduce crashes and fatalities. It's incredible to me that you take a look at the fatalities on the streets of any city, and they're almost just this accepted, that's just life in the big city, right? There's nothing we can do about it. Business as usual. Oh, well, people die. And there's a ton of stuff that we can do about it. And by actually bringing that safety lens to the investments that you make, and looking to improve the safety and the livability of your streets, you can go a long way to actually having win-win-wins on your streets. And so collecting that data also on the safety side goes a long way to making the case for why these investments are extremely important.
Hi, Janette, again.
Hey, Chris.
Thanks for touring Cleveland all day yesterday. I wanted to ask you, well, first of all, I hope a future president calls on you to run the U.S. DOT. I think it'd be great.
Thank you for that.
And on that point, I wanted to ask you a quick local question, then back to a national question. On the local level, what stock you take and how often you applied temporary applications just to see if it could work, temporary bike lanes, temporary reduction of lanes, so on. And if you think that's a viable model to use in cities. And then back to DOT, what do you think the future of DOT is? Because cities look at ourselves as on a different planet. We're on Mars and they're out on Venus somewhere. And is that ever going to get reconciled?
Yeah. I'm a big believer in showing the world of the possible and pilot projects. And we did a lot of that in New York City to great success. And you're seeing that actually happen all over the country and all over the world. And a big part of it is because you can move quickly, and it's not a lot of money, and you can do so much with paint. I really do think that I should be sponsored on a tour by paint companies, actually, because I'm a big believer in the paint application. So you can, and the other interesting piece, and why is that happening? Why are we seeing so much of that? A lot of it is because you've got mayors that are usually in 4-year terms, and infrastructure projects are usually 5 years, to get anything done. And so a mayor can actually show what they want to accomplish by literally outlining the city that they want to see and building support for that. And so I think that's a big reason why you're seeing pilot projects and using temporary materials as just the first phase to get to longer term transformations of these cities. And so I think it's a really important strategy, particularly in cities that are stretched for resources, and actually want to get things done quickly. As to US DOT and the federal government, I think there has to be a wholesale realignment in terms of what that relationship is about. Half the world lives in cities, 75% by 2050. Cities are where it's happening. The federal government has largely gotten out of the transportation business in terms of funding. You're seeing the same thing on the state level. And so localities are really the front line of getting things done. And so I think that, to the gentleman's question about autonomous vehicles, I think there's also a brand new role that's going to occur in terms of what does this mean? And traditionally, the federal government has dealt with the relationship at the local level. They see local as state and not local as city. And so what the innovation that you're seeing on streets around the country are really at the city level. And so redoing those relationships, I think, is going to be very important. When you think about it, the MPO structure, the structures that we have that govern transportation implementation in the states, is 50 years old. So much like the evolution and the revolution that we're seeing on the streets, so too we need that same kind of evolution in governments and regulation. And so I think that's going to be a big part moving forward of a reset of that federal-state-local relationship.
Good afternoon, thank you. My name is Alex Pesta. I'm a planner, and I'm sure that there's a lot of great planners, a lot of familiar faces. There's a lot of talent here. I would also surmise that there's a lot of talent outside of here, meaning our residents and some of our community members that have great ideas, sometimes far exceeding what our creativity levels can be. So I hear a lot of conversation about pilot projects. Can you help guide us without maybe incriminating yourself, the balance of begging for forgiveness versus asking for permission?
What did I say this was? This was about conversations of consequence, huh? Really consequential questions here. I think it's important to work with communities to, I think, convey what you're trying to accomplish, right? I know this is going to be a bit long-winded, but when we did Plan YC, we talked to communities all over New York City, right, to get this shared vision of what we needed to do, right? Because there wasn't this galvanizing idea about what we needed to do in the city. There was no bigger vision. And once people sort of buy into that vision, right, and get that we need to change things in order to grow and thrive, that's a really important touchstone. And you'll have a very different conversation at the local level once people understand that, oh, well, we're going to probably have to do something to adapt our city to meet the new needs and environmental consequences and economic development needs. So that conversation is really important. We were very opportunistic in going to places where we knew that they wanted to have change. And we did work very hard to create a showcase of programs, right? And so once we had that really became the base that people could, I was referring before to, examples of what people could point to saying, I would like that. I would actually like a protected bike lane. I would actually like a bus rapid transit line. I want that pedestrian plaza. Whereas before, there wasn't even a vocabulary for that kind of change. And so now New Yorkers are very fluent in the language of bulb outs and wayfinding and pedestrian plazas in a way that they didn't even have a vocabulary for what that change was about. So it's really important to, I think, establish what's possible and talk about it that way and create a new language for change.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I'm sorry, I so don't want this to be over, but today at the City Club, we are enjoying a forum with Janette Sadik-Khan, Principal of Transportation at Bloomberg Associates and author of Street Fight, Handbook for an Urban Revolution. Community partners for today's forum include APA Cleveland, Bike Cleveland, Sustainable Cleveland, and the Western Reserve Land Conservancy. Our hospitality partners is the Metropolitan at the 9 Hotel. We thank all of you for your partnership. We welcome guests at tables hosted by the Cleveland City Planning Commission, woo-woo! Cleveland Metro Parks, Cleveland State University, Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs, Land Studio, Ohio City, Inc., and University Circle, Inc. Additionally, we welcome students from North Olmsted City Schools. Student participation in City Club forums is provided by the Loeb Foundation. We thank all of you for being here today. The sale of Ms. Sadik-Khan's book, Street Fight, Handbook for an Urban Revolution, is provided by a cultural exchange. And that brings us to the end of our forum today. Thank you, Mrs. Sadik-Khan, and thank ladies and gentlemen for being a part of this forum. We are now adjourned. I love this.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.